there we go.
There we go. We got you going.
All right, camera's rolling. Zane, back.
What?
You're not in your seat.
Here's not her seat.
That's right. I'll tell you what. You know what? Before we get started,
My seat.
we need to collect your guys' worksheets.
We haven't even done the back.
Yeah, you told us just to do
Yeah.
that.
Yes, I did. Hold on to them. We'll do this at the end of class.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, let's get through this first because this is actually more priority. Tomorrow, big vocab quiz. Actually, Zach Puckett. No, Zane, you moved back. I don't know why you moved over there. Move.
I put my brace on.
Don't care. Okay, you're not even supposed to be over there anyway. Okay. So, big vocab quiz.
Oh,
Chapter
okay.
18, Chapter
I guess I
19,
can walk on.
over 30 points, lot of points. So I would prepare. So let's kind of finish up some of the terms from this Chapter 19. Today, we are going to talk about the geologic time scale in just a little more detail. All of Earth's history starts down here, ends up here. Starts with something called pre-Cambrian time. That's what this says right here if you can't read it. Pre-Cambrian time, which started 4.6 billion years ago. Age of the Earth, birthday of the Earth. Lasted till 400 million years ago. Okay. 500 million years ago, I'm sorry. Then, what I'm going to talk about today is the Paleozoic. That's what this word says right here. Paleozoic era. Paleozoic era is a time in Earth's history where organisms started to flourish. You have a ton of organisms, plant and animals, evolving. That's how this time is different from this time. The Mesozoic, there's mass extinction here we'll talk about. Mesozoic era. That's the dinosaur era. Okay, that is the dinosaur era. We will talk about that briefly and what happened there. And then currently present day is something called the Cenozoic era. And I'm going to want you guys to know these major eras. Okay. Oh, let's see.
Because I can't. Oh, yeah, I did.
Okay, geologic time scale. It's common on the OGT for them to have this picture and they ask you questions about it. So you won't need to memorize this picture, but you need to know what it represents. You need to know that it represents Earth's history, basically the birthday of the Earth till present day. And I want you guys to know what major events happened at certain times. So we're starting at the very beginning, something called pre-Cambrian time. This is starting in the very beginning, 4.6 billion years ago. And it lasts till 500 million years ago. This is a long time. In fact, pre-Cambrian time represents the longest part of Earth history. As far as life is concerned, if you were able to take a time machine back to pre-Cambrian time, you wouldn't see a whole lot of life at all. You know, this is when life is first thought to evolve. Life evolved, but for the most part, it remains simple. One cell, most likely bacteria. So as far as like taking a trip back and trying to find anything that was living, you'd have a tough time. The things that were living were so small you couldn't see them. However, those critters, and this is an example, or this is the name of one of the first forms of life called a cyanobacteria. In fact, you saw them under a microscope the other day. They were the green and blue and purple kind of strands running all together. These cyanobacteria, as small as they were responsible for doing something extremely important. They transformed the atmosphere. They put oxygen in it. You know, our atmosphere wasn't all nice like it is today. It was pretty nasty, actually. And the cyanobacteria are credited with putting oxygen into the atmosphere. Lucky for us, we need that oxygen. O3. Everybody know what that is? What chemical that is? O3?
Ozone.
Ozone, very good. In fact, very good. Ozone. All right, this is important. This is like OGT test. You got the Earth. You got an atmosphere surrounding Earth. A real thin sliver in that atmosphere that runs all the way around is the ozone layer. That's a good thing. We want an ozone layer. What does the ozone layer protects us from?
UV rays.
Yes, protects from UV rays. If the ozone layer were to suddenly disappear today, we would die. Every living thing would die. Because what would happen are those harmful rays from the sun would not get bounced back, and those harmful rays from the sun would eventually end up mutating the DNA in every living organism. Living organisms wouldn't stand a chance, whether you're plant, animal, don't care what you are. So lucky for us, these cyanobacteria were around to put the oxygen in the atmosphere, which eventually led to the development of this ozone layer, and that's a very good thing. In other words, even though not a whole lot of life existed in the Precambrian time, it set the way for it, because the only life that was there, there was probably bacteria, but there may have been in this era even very simple multicellular critters. Nothing big, but if those existed, they were in the ocean, because the ocean actually kind of offered like a shield under the water. So the water acted somewhat as a shield, but if things were living, they were in the water. All right, so end of this era, bam, 500 million years ago. It starts something called the Paleozoic era. And the reason this era is kind of lumped as an era is, before I get into that, it was from 500 million years ago to about 250 million years ago. Okay, so it lasted about 250 million years. The reason this era is famous is because organisms basically started to flourish. What I mean by that is a ton of organisms started to evolve. First the fish, then the amphibians, then the reptiles. You guys remember this from grade school, learning about kind of this transition, fish to amphibians to reptiles. They all made their way from the water onto the land. Now they could. We have an ozone layer, thanks to those cyanobacteria from the Precambrian time. Mammals didn't evolve just yet, okay? And by the way, dinosaurs were not around just yet. It was just pretty much fish, amphibians, and reptiles. Another thing that happened in this era is something called Pangea formed. Pangea, if you guys remember, giant landmass. At one point back in Earth's history, all the continents were all smushed together in one giant landmass, which they call Pangea. It was during the Paleozoic era. At the end of the Paleozoic era, basically, is when Pangea, bam, had formed. Okay. Unfortunately, all things must come to an end. Ends with a mass extinction. At the end of this era, there was a mass extinction, believed to be the biggest mass extinction on Earth, caused by major volcanic activity, volcanoes. Major volcanic activity. This is this is not the one that took out the dinosaurs. Like I said, dinosaurs weren't around yet, but this is a different mass extinction that was responsible for, it took out even more life than the one that the asteroid that took out the dinosaurs was. When I say volcanoes, basically over in Siberia, there was a ton, not just one, not just two, not just three, but probably hundreds or thousands of volcanoes going on at the same time. There was just this massive plume from under Earth. And that's what, and you guys have seen volcanoes on TV. You know, volcanoes push a lot of stuff out into the atmosphere, mostly it's dust and gases and stuff you don't want to be around. But if you have a ton of volcanoes going on at once, all those gases are going to shoot in the air. And what ended up happening is those gases traveled all around the globe. Cut off sunlight to Earth. Well, without sunlight, you know, those organisms that rely on the sun to make their food, all those autotrophs, all those photosynthetic organisms are going to be out of luck. If they're out of luck and they die, all the organisms that relied on those organisms are going to die. So it's predicted that like 95% of all life basically kicked the bucket from this mass extinction. Okay. Hey, the evidence they have for this, remember how we talked about rock layers being laid down in layers? There is actually a certain rock layer, they've actually even named it, called the PT boundary. This is kind of cool. The PT boundary. It's a rock layer. And they dated that rock layer to 250 million years ago. Remember, they can do that with the radiometric dating we talked about yesterday. So they were dating the rocks. Okay, they dated these rocks and they determined they were that age. But all around the globe, when they go and look at this rock layer, they notice just below the boundary, lots of fossils. Just above the boundary, nothing for a while. It's common. It's like everywhere they go around the Earth and they find this rock layer, they see lots of organisms down here, nothing. And that's just good evidence to support the fact that, you know, a lot of them kicked the bucket. Okay. There's other evidence out there where they took chemical samples. They noticed that the oxygen levels in the rocks like decreased rapidly, really fast around that time. There's other things, but that's the big one. Moving along. Mesozoic era. This is the most popular era because this is the era of the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs ruled during the Mesozoic era. This took place 250 million years ago to about 65 million years ago. This is a common question people get, and no adults seem to know it. You know, everybody talks about the dinosaurs, and the dinosaurs were cool, and the dinosaurs roamed the earth, and yada, yada, yada. But I guarantee if you go up to any adult and ask them when exactly the dinosaurs lived, I bet you none of them would be able to give you an answer. They wouldn't have a clue. Well, this is it. They lived between 250 million years ago and 65 million years ago. So 100 million years ago, if I could rewind, if I could go to time machine, I would plug in 100 million years, and I know that would fall within this range. I would be able to see the dinosaurs. It'd be pretty cool. Okay, also during this era, Pangea starts to split. Splits up. OGT question. You guys should know this. What evidence is there to support the fact that the giant land masses, or there was a giant land mass that has now since broken up? There's basically a couple cute, good pieces of evidence. What do you got, Kirsten?
When they look at all of the layers, they find the same fossils and the same natural resources and stuff.
Absolutely. This is awesome. This is cool. This is what Kirsten's talking about. South America right here and Africa over here. When they do fossil digs over here and over here, they find like the same exact fossils. Not living creatures. That's different. You know, there definitely different creatures live there now. But when they go back and they dig up old fossils here to old fossils here, they're identical, which implies these two land masses were once together. Makes sense. What's another, speaking of South America and Africa, what's another piece of evidence? Yeah.
If you retrace it, they all like fit back together.
Exactly. What I have my 8th graders do as an assignment, we cut out all the continents, like present day continents, and you can piece them all together like a puzzle. And then the easiest one to fit together is South America and Africa, because Africa has like this kind of divot right here, and South America has this part that sticks out here, and you can completely see where they were once kind of connected. You could do that with all the continents, okay? All the continents work that way. They all fit together like a puzzle. So, very good. I wanted to kind of remind you of that. That kind of makes for a really good OGT question. Okay, but it was during the dinosaur era, though, while the dinosaurs roamed, that Pangea was actually splitting. In other words, all these continents were splitting up to become to their present day positions. But unfortunately, the dinosaurs are not around anymore. Ends with a mass extinction. This one believed to be caused by an asteroid. The evidence to support that can be found in the rock layer formed during that time, which they call the KT boundary. Not the PT boundary, the KT boundary. This is cool. In this boundary, they find a lot of this stuff, iridium. Iridium is number 77 on the periodic table of the elements. It's a radioactive, rare substance here on Earth. We don't have a lot of it naturally in our crust, in the crust of Earth. However, a lot of asteroids, a lot of meteors have iridium in it. So in this KT boundary, they've noticed high levels of this iridium, which suggests that something from beyond had come, crashed, exploded. All the dust from that kind of went all around the globe, settled, and there's actually a lot of evidence to support the fact that an asteroid. So, and there's other pieces of evidence. That's kind of the big one. Okay, finally, the Cenozoic era. This is the one we live in right now. So 65 million years ago to the present day. Cenozoic era. And the only thing I'm really going to say about this is the mammals. This is kind of the era of the mammals. The fact that they are thriving at that point. Okay. So that's kind of that. The other thing I want to go over with you guys. Okay, you guys still have that worksheet to do. Let me try to see if I can end early. Okay, tomorrow's vocab quiz contains a couple of other terms. I'll be honest, I'm surprised that they put these in this particular chapter, but I'm going to go over them anyway because they appear on your vocab quiz tomorrow, and there's something we're going to see in next chapter. They're pretty easy to understand. Okay, all this talk about mass extinctions leads to some of the words we're going to be talking about now. Obviously, when there have been mass extinctions of the past, and there's been actually quite a lot. Here, let me put up a picture for you real quick. There have actually been, all these black spikes on this chart represent mass extinctions. Some were worse than others. So look at this peak right here. That, where I have the arrow drawn, that black peak represents the mass extinction that I was talking about caused by volcanoes. Okay? This mass extinction right here, that's the one that took out the dinosaurs. Okay, but you can see, look at on this chart, you can see other black peaks here, implying that just all throughout Earth's history, there's been periods of mass extinctions. And when there's been mass extinctions, that leads to a lot of change in the organisms. Some get taken out, like the dinosaurs. Others manage to survive that and then end up thriving in the long run. But that leads to these two words. All organisms don't evolve at the same rate as others.
So these would be on our test.
Yeah, they're on the vocab test.
Just write it all.
Yeah. I think you guys should have written down the definition for them already. Okay. But when evolution of an organism results in kind of a slow change, like if an organism, I'll put slow evolution of an organism. Organisms can evolve at different rates. When it's gradual, it's called gradualism, obviously, hence the word. Punctuated equilibrium. Usually due to mass extinctions, a lot of times you have these quick rates of evolution. Punctuated equilibrium, fast, quick. Again, usually mass extinctions bring that out. Okay, so those two words are, we're going to go in more detail on these words in the next chapter, but for the sake of getting you through the vocab quiz tomorrow, that will help with that. There's another word I want you to understand called macroevolution. Macro. Macro means big. What's the opposite of macro? Micro. Exactly. I'll tell you the difference here. But the vocab term that's on the test tomorrow is macroevolution. Macroevolution recurs to evolution that you can really see on a large scale. Like, in other words, large changes in a species. Ones that you can visibly notice. Perfect example, whales. Okay, whales and dolphins were originally their ancestors, those that were actually land animals. They looked a lot like deer, to be honest, they think. So something that looks like a deer actually went about major macroevolution over time to become present-day dolphins and whales. That's macroevolution. Large changes in a species' anatomy. Microevolution, we don't talk about that much in this class, but you can actually talk about evolution on a small scale. When you do that, you're talking about DNA and alleles. When you have little changes in your DNA that you might not notice visibly, but that accumulate slowly over time, that's microevolution. But macroevolution is evolution on a large scale where you can actually see these great changes in a species. Okay, another word on your test tomorrow is something called adaptive radiation. When you think of this word, remember we saw that one movie on the Galapagos Islands? And in the Galapagos Islands, they were talking about these birds or finches. I drew a little picture here to try to get you to remember what adaptive radiation is. Adaptive radiation is the idea that you start with one species, and when that one species ends up transforming or changing itself to a number of different species, like the branches of a tree, that's called adaptive radiation. In other words, it's almost like you can think of it as one species radiated out to become a bunch of different other species. That's what adaptive radiation is. And like I said, what happened at the Galapagos Islands, if you remember, you had one finch, they believe, that came over from South America, the big mainland, South America, got blown over somehow to these islands in the Galapagos. And the Galapagos Islands are like, 10 or 20 islands, kind of off in the middle by itself of the ocean. On every little island, you have a finch, but the finches don't look alike. They all look different. Their beaks all look different. And their beaks look different because of the food they eat. So you have some finches that have these giant, thick beaks that are able to crack nuts. You have other finches that have these like needle point nose beaks, and they take the nectar out of a flower. You have other finches that have curved kind of beaks. They like to eat insects, and that's what's plentiful on the island. In other words, when you have one species that radiates out into different species, they all came from the same one, and they all look a little different, but they're all related. That's called adaptive radiation. Okay, finally, the last word that's on your exam. This is the example that they use in your book. Convergent evolution. And if you know what the word converge means, you'll understand this word. If something converges, it comes together.
Did I say armadillo?
Yeah. Armadillo, aardvark, and an anteater. Okay. In other words, and during this type of evolution, this is cool. These three organisms are located on different parts of the earth, okay? They don't live together. They live in different parts of the earth, but they kind of all look alike. They evolved. They all changed separately from one another. But the reason they all look alike is because they pretty much live in very similar climates, wherever they may be, and they kind of eat similar food. So convergent evolution refers to the fact that even though they have nothing in common as far as they don't live anywhere near each other, they kind of slowly start to look alike because their lifestyles are the same. Convergent evolution. So armadillos, aardvarks, and anteaters don't live around each other, but if you saw a picture of each of these three, they look like. I think they eat things like little insects and ants. Yeah. So because they eat those kind of deals, they've developed like the snouts. They're all real long, and they all have the same kind of feet. Things like that. It's kind of like they changed and evolved separate of one each other, but they all still look the same. All right. I believe that covers everything you need to know for the quiz tomorrow. Big quiz tomorrow. And vocab. So, and actually, you know what? You guys have that worksheet. I'll make that. You can either turn that in at the end of today's class or tomorrow. Wrestlers, I want it today because I know you guys aren't going to be here tomorrow. But that's the Iceman worksheet. Okay, we should be able to do the Iceman worksheet. If you finish with that, study your vocab. Yeah, you gotta do the back too. Front and back. Both sides.
Have you used carbon 14 just to make extinct things or rocks too?
You don't usually use carbon 14 for rocks. Rocks are too cool, so no, you would not use carbon 14 for rocks.
Rocks are